I've still got my blue hair colour in. It's this blue wax that you put in, and it makes your hair sort of rock solid as well as colours it. So what a lovely day it was today. Amazing. Over 100,000 people, really packed out. Go and check out all of the videos from today all over social media that we've been sharing. And it was a lovely community vibe. I was at the middle of the march, went to the front of the march, then got to go backstage. And what I want to talk about is the whole Corbyn dynamic. We really need to discuss this. While I was backstage, right at the beginning, before speakers came on, there was some cheeky chants of "Where's Jeremy Corbyn?" which a few people sort of started up, and it seemed to catch on. And a few of us backstage sort of like grimaced at, oh God, that's not good. And then when the speakers came on stage, then there was a bigger "Where's Jeremy Corbyn?" And then David Lammy later on sort of also seemed to go for Corbyn and sort of got chants from the crowd. So it was a lovely day overall. It was all positive and cohesive, but I want to talk about this because I know that these chants of "Where's Jeremy Corbyn?" is going to trigger certain people in certain parts, and quite rightly actually. I note that video of that "Where's Jeremy Corbyn" chant, Owen Jones, for example, sort of quote tweeted with, actually he's in a refugee camp today. So fair play to that. But of course, the "Where's Jeremy Corbyn" question is a larger one about why isn't he out there? Why isn't he doing more? Now, to be clear, in terms of doing more, in terms of the parliamentary process, putting aside the single market debate for a start, in terms of the parliamentary process, we should give full credit to Corbyn and McDonnell and the Labour front bench for actually whipping recently in order to get the meaningful vote amendment through, and it was the Tory rebels who, even though they actually got something salvageable at the end, nevertheless Dominic Grieve backing down on his own amendment in order to keep on board with the government did actually promise fireworks and then present a damp squib. We do have the mechanics that we want to go forward, but that wasn't done with the full flair that we were promised, and that did seem to embolden Theresa May. So you can't take anything away from Corbyn and McDonnell and the Labour front bench for all of that. But what a lot of those who are pro-EU, from whatever political party, get frustrated with Corbyn is about, and certainly, I mean, if I were having anything to do with the Labour policy, I would totally understand that you want to preserve those communities, especially in the northeast and northwest that traditionally vote Labour, that now look a little bit vulnerable. I'm aware that constituencies up there voted Leave, even if most Labour voters in them didn't actually vote Leave for most of them, and identity championing those working classes, right? Even though the working class youth voted Remain. But anyway, still you want to hold on to that. But given that the vast majority of away the whole soul of the deal, but if you break towards Remain, then you've got a smaller group to deal with, and you should just be putting in the work now of working with them for them to understand that if you do make a break to supporting it, at the very least a people's vote, then why? And because we're not seeing the Labour front bench do that, then that is what is getting a lot of people frustrated within Labour. But attacking Jeremy Corbyn isn't the way to go about it. You don't build bridges by burning bridges. And so all this attack really fires up a lot of Labour that start pointing out, look, they can't salvage the thing alone. They need the Tory rebels, and then if the Tory rebels let you down. So also because Jeremy Corbyn has come under such bizarre and unfair attack from the mainstream media, the right-wing mainstream media, then this base is just very sensitive to attack. And as soon as anyone else starts trying to nudge, then a lot of his support base, instead of engaging with the arguments, tend to conclude enough. But then the whole thing about whether they were kicked out or not and who was lying, you know, I've talked to them. They said this with John McDonnell and Jacob Rees's pocket, and the one about Diane Abbott where they drove that around her constituency when she's already said that she wants the people to vote. So they messed up on that one. I remember them sending me through, look, we're setting up these adverts, you know, can you reshare? And I was like, no, this isn't good. This is going to turn against you, the very audience that you should be working with and needing to build. But anyway, it was too late by that stage. But I think they really need to address that, because they did burn bridges where they should have been building bridges. But this gets us on to the wider thing of these two audiences, like the pro-EU community and basically the Corbyn base. They both need each other. If Corbyn wants to get into number 10, he needs this audience on board. If we are to get anywhere with the people's vote, with an option to remain, opening up dialogue about what is sensible, particularly after Theresa May tried to kick the meaningful vote into the long grass and cut out Parliament from the process. Parliament is the other political parties. So what she is driving for now is a Tory Brexit, but not a broad Tory Brexit, you know, narrow, hard Brexit driven by the Tories, and that is not reflective of the vast, that is not reflective of the people that voted Leave in all their heterogeneity, let alone the country. This is why we have that extra argument for a people's vote, and this is why it would suit Labour. It would also suit Labour to reject what she has tried to do over the last 2 years with her Brexit, boot it out of Parliament, and then say, can we get the government in the public as well? And that really opens then a new door to a new vision of Remain and Reform, which was the original Labour agenda. And that's what I think we should all be working on. And I thought, good, more talk like that starts opening the door more to where we can start building a sensible path forward, because we are all recognising that the government is getting itself into a very serious mess from which it cannot get out alone. So it's up to the rest of us to build a path out for the country, and we need all of Labour to be doing with that. I mean, I'm card-carrying Labour, so I'm talking about all parts of Labour, all the youth parts, all the trade union parts that are starting to come across for people's vote. But it shouldn't be bitter, it shouldn't be with sniping, it should be a big collaborative thing, because at the end of the day, this works for all of us. So that is why, to wrap it all up, chants of where's Jeremy Corbyn might be fun for a few, but it really doesn't help building the bridges that we need to be building the bridges now. It doesn't understand the predicament of Labour and work with Labour. So that's what we need to be doing now. Anyway, that's my thoughts. You say it wasn't bitter. It was constructive criticism. Okay, it's only constructive criticism if you're ensuring that it's constructive, though. And so I know a lot of people think that by niggling at the Labour position, they can get it on board. It is actually much better to actually build it wasn't insulting. Okay, well, let's hope it's not taken as being insulting. I think I've already seen some people who have taken offence from it because they're touchy, because I think we do actually need a different approach, or at least a complementary approach, which is more overtly constructive about why this benefits everyone who wants to get rid of a mess that would absolutely damage the country. Okay, cool. Those are my thoughts. Please feel free to share yours. Catch you soon. Hey all, right, let's go through these Trump tariffs and how they show why a UK-US trade deal would be pretty dangerous for the UK. So first of all, let's discuss these tariffs and how they came about. There's a clear reason why they come about, and that is because there is global overproduction of steel and, to a degree, aluminium, and that needs to be fixed because it puts strain on everyone. Now, the best way to deal with this, and let's be clear that the main source of the problem is actually China, and China coming onto the scene with a lot of new production. The main way to actually go about dealing with this is in the multilateral environment, and if you do that slowly, then you don't have any big hits and shock waves which set up disruption anywhere, but you work it out over time. And given that the EU and US and Canada and Mexico and Brazil, etc., are all allies, they all could collectively put pressure upon China, for example. But this isn't what Trump has done, because he is not a team player. He is not being sensible. He's got this America First policy where he's only looking at his own country in the short term. He wants to shore up steel, and then so he just puts tariffs on everything coming in. He had a few exemptions floating around, but now they're gone. But this is absolutely disruptive for everyone. And the crazy thing is that Donald Trump has said this is for national security and defense reasons, which is absolutely bogus, and he's going to be taken to the World Trade Organization over this. But it doesn't even help within his own country, because the actual steel users within his country, those that are making anything from tin cans to actual defense machinery or agricultural machinery, need steel supply from everywhere, including from the UK that do specialised high-grade steel for some applications. But he's putting up walls and barriers to that, which is actually driving up the price of steel within the US, limiting the supply and actually hurting those that use steel within the US. So it's destructive on the US side, as many US commentators are saying. But then also on our side, as in the rest of the world, that is damaging of our steel supply. I mean, it's going to hit places right around the UK, from Port Talbot to Scunthorpe to wherever. And we've got, 31,000 workers in the UK steel industry, and our shipments to the US are worth about $350 million per annum. So that hits us hard and suddenly, as well as many other places. So it hurts America, it hurts America's allies, it hurts the relationship between America and America's allies, but then also means that as part of the process, America's allies like Canada, like Mexico, like the EU, and well, China's been doing it already, are all putting in retaliatory tariffs in order to try and make Trump back down, but also regather the monetary cost of what the US is costing us. And that is a trade war, or at least the early stages of a trade war, in which everyone tends to lose. It really would take Donald Trump to back down, but is that really in the nature of the man? Another problem is that because the US is putting up all of these barriers, usually when you do that, it diverts the flow of steel to other places. So we now need instant measures within the UK, well, within Europe as a whole, in order to make sure that the Chinese steel, which otherwise would have gone to the US market, doesn't completely overflood ours and cripple our systems. So it's been incredibly selfish by Donald Trump. Instead of recognising that everyone is under strain and working it all out together, he's just gone with, well, I'm all right, Jack kind of attitude, and Chinese steel can go and collapse other countries unless they take strong measures. So what does this mean for US-UK trade deal? Why did I go through all of that? Well, firstly, what it shows you is that if you thought that trade deals between the UK and the US, whether it be under Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Donald Trump, would all be the same thing, because it comes down to economic common sense, it comes down to the optimal win-win. It does not work like that. Trade deals are also very political things, and trade is very political. And what you can see with this incident is that regardless of what advice goes on within the US, ultimately Donald Trump is calling the shots on this according to his own personal philosophies, whether they are wise or unwise. And pretty much everyone agrees that they're unwise, and yet that's what's happening. So you cannot rely on Donald Trump to do a trade deal that is a win-win, that is sensible, or that is anything but what scratches his own political thinking. And his own political thinking, as lots of analysts say, is that the world owes America. America shouldn't be buying from the rest of the world. The rest of the world should be buying from America. That's what needs to be rebalanced. So his philosophy in terms of approaching other countries is not as a friend, is not as an ally, is not as someone who wants to preserve a productive free trade global system. It's someone with a blatant America First policy, which is going to shove his stuff onto the rest of the world and not allow anyone else's stuff in. And that's what we would be up against immediately after coming out of the EU. If we do come out of the EU, we would come into that situation where he's got this policy, he has the bigger market, we have the smaller market, he has the experienced aggressive negotiators, we have naive negotiators desperate for a deal, and that's the way the traffic's going to go. Now, so much is obvious. The thing that worries me on top of this is actually the thinking at the UK end by those who would lead such a trade deal. It should be the case that while thinking about, well, it's clear what America wants to do. They want to open up our agriculture, they want to open up our NHS, they want to force higher medicines prices on us because they don't like our socialised healthcare system, which haggles for lower medical prices, unlike their own Wild West. They want to force us to do that, and they also want to open up all of our brands like Scotch whisky or Cornish pasties or whatever, what have you. It's clear what they want. What do we want the other way? And none of the Brexiteers are actually talking about that. They're not talking about how our services companies could get advantage in the US or how we could open up American procurement. These would be the big asks. But they're not saying that, possibly because they know that wouldn't get very far. We were trying that during TTIP, and America is very locked down like that. What really worries me is that the Brexiteers are already making all the noises for us to bend over a barrel and receive whatever Donald Trump wants to push our way. So they're talking about, well, wouldn't it be better for the consumers if we were to have cheaper products from the US or cheaper food from the US or invite their healthcare companies over? That's the sentiment that we're getting from them. So complete capitulation. And here is the danger with that. Let's talk specifically about farming. The danger is not just that we step down in our food quality and standards. It's not just that we collapse our own farming industry, because they would be undercut, and so then our farming industry goes, and there's food security associated with that, and there's also British traditions and culture associated with that. You know, real worse globalization, absolutely undercutting, you know, British culture, British farming traditions, British agricultural traditions. But also, this notion of choice is false. Take, for example, milk. The problem with US milk is that it's not just nutritionally lower, it's because they have worse animal welfare standards in the US, which means American cows are more likely to get udder infections. That pushes up the somatic cell count. They don't want to do testing at the farm level, they want to do testing at a later level, but basically animal welfare suffers relative to European dairy produce. The animal welfare in the US suffers because of the methods that they use. We don't have a choice as to, on a personal level, you know, in the supermarket, it's not a case of, oh, there's American milk and there's British milk. You may have that. But what about in schools, when schools are serving up milk? Are you going to be asking where that milk comes from? What about when they're using dairy products for cooking in your children's schools or in your work canteens? Or when you go down the local coffee shop and have milk in your coffee, or you go to your local greasy spoon and order a cup of tea with milk in it, are you going to be asking in each and every restaurant and canteen and coffee shop and tea shop where the milk comes from or where the dairy produce comes from each and every time? That's the problem. You know, once it's in the system, it's in the system, and then we as a nation are sponsoring animal welfare standards that are lower than what we want, as well as that undercutting British farming. So this is the colossal misunderstanding with this notion of we will have choice about milk, about chlorinated chicken, about hormone-treated beef. There will be systems by which this gets into our country, and we will be supporting it, whether we like the notion or not. And this gets us into the concept of sovereignty. With the EU, we have shared sovereignty on the continental level. We all choose together what standards we want, and we all have the same kind of notion of wanting to drive high standards and protect our core for example, farming industries and manufacturing industries. We have pooled sovereignty there. What would happen with the US if we come out of the EU and go with the US is that they have different standards to ours, lower standards than ours, standards that we don't want, but we wouldn't have much of a say in that. We would just give up our sovereignty and allow their standards and what they've developed to come in and undercut ours. That's a very, very more aggressive scenario than the kind of consensual, consensus-based agreements that we have at the moment with the EU. So that's the core of it for me. I mean, there was even an analysis by the US think tank, the RAND Corporation, about half a year back, saying that if the UK were to do a trade deal with the US, their very best scenario for doing this would be to try and make it a trilateral between the US, UK and EU, so that we've got more collective market power to get into the US and also more collective market size in order to ensure that we keep the British European standards that Brits have worked to build up and that Brits want to keep. But what we're looking at here is Trump being an absolute political nutcase that doesn't look for win-win, that doesn't understand a multilateral system, that is thinking about America first, that would be aggressive with us. And we have Brexiteers in this country that are desperate for a swift deal and also desperate to bend the whole country over and undercut us. So there is a double danger there that really, really should not be understated. Thank you. Britain now has one of the warmest attitudes towards immigration in the European Union, thanks to Brexit, Michael Gove has claimed. Now, when I first saw this, when I saw the video associated with this, I actually physically felt sick. I actually felt a knot of anger and sickness right about here. And I could have turned on the camera at the time and just blasted it and ranted it, but being a scientist of scientific training, I've gone and researched why he said what he did and gone through it so that I can break it down for you logically and show you quite clearly where he is wrong and why he is so wrong and why this is offensive and dangerous at very high levels. Now, what he said was, and you can watch the Policy Exchange video on Twitter, he said that Britain has now become more welcoming since the Brexit vote. This is true. He said that liberal commentators such as Sundar Katwala of British Future and Alex Massey of The Times have pointed this out, that data show that the public attitude towards immigration is better now than it was at the time of the Brexit vote. This is all true. This is all fine. He then went on to say, the act of taking back control has allowed British citizens to show that they can be more welcoming. And this is the disingenuous leap of association, the false correlation and causation, which generates the lie. There is no data showing that this trend since the Brexit vote is attributable to citizens feeling as though they've got taken back control and therefore love EU citizens more. In fact, let's have a look at the situation in 2016 versus now. In 2016, we had the referendum in which there were threats of Turkey coming in, 76 million coming to eat our NHS. We had the tabloid press on an almost daily basis generating front pages about what immigrants were doing to strain our systems. We had politicians doubling down on that. We were 1 year back from the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean. All the fear around immigration was being ramped up, and immediately after the vote there was that explosion of abuses and plenty of accounts of that has been well documented, and also well documented internationally from outside observers. So look at the situation since then, and what you have seen is that we haven't had more refugee crisis. We haven't had more EU citizens flood in. In fact, we've had very valuable citizens leave, whether it be doctors or whether it be nurses, whether it be hiring problems in some of our more skilled professions, issues around social care. We have also seen our government being abusive of EU citizens, treating them as bargaining chips, making them jump through hoops on those permanent residence forms that are 85 pages long and their passport to hold during all that time. And we have seen all of this. And so if you were to say what has caused the public to soften their opinion about immigration since the Brexit vote and now, it is not necessarily attributable to the Brexit vote and taking back control, because we have not taken back any control yet. I would argue that there's lots of things that need to be looked into here. As a scientist, certainly you can see that over time opinions change as more of the younger generation come on board and they've got more open attitudes to immigration. But also there's a catharsis of, after all that anti-immigration pressure during the referendum vote, we have now actually seen the consequences of chasing out immigrants. We've seen the value of immigrants. And for me, for being one of the ones that has worked with so many others and trying to talk about over these last 1.5 years the value of immigrants and the value of EU immigrants to our science and research systems, to our wider society, to our NHS, the fact that they are part of British families, the fact that they are being mistreated, not just EU citizens, but all immigrants, to think that if any of that has had any cut through with the public whatsoever, that Michael Gove should now snaffle it and say that it is a proof of Brexit's goodness that we have had this change, rather than it being a reaction to Brexit. But that's only point one, this false attribution that he starts with. Point two, and more pertinent on a human level, is what is it to be welcoming? If you just look at polls of attitudes of Brits towards immigrants and say we are more welcoming because there are now more people that don't mind immigrants, that's not really what welcoming is about. Welcoming is about when an immigrant comes into this country or a visitor comes into this country, do they feel welcome? So look since the Brexit vote and look before the Brexit vote. Do you think they felt more welcome before or after? Because we have information on that, we have data on that, we have feedback on that. Immediately after the referendum, we at Scientists for EU did a survey on the science community to see if there was any damage so far immediately from Brexit. And we got the largest aspect was going on about problems with xenophobia, wanting to leave the country, not feeling welcome here anymore, as well as all the disruption to the science collaborations. That was visceral. And I've talked to so many people since, non-Brit EU citizens working in science, that have felt not welcome, that have felt as though this isn't the country that they came to years before and believed in and believed supported them. They viscerally feel that that is not the case. And also, if you look at surveys done on EU nurses and EU doctors from those associated bodies, you see it repeatedly. Not only are they leaving, but if you ask them why they're leaving, it is because they do not feel welcome here anymore. Or they are making plans to leave because since Brexit, they feel less welcome. This is clearly documented. So what does it mean for a country to be welcoming? It means that people coming to that country feel welcome. Do they feel more welcome since the Brexit vote? Well, looking at several different communities here, the answer is very clearly no. So this is why, if you genuinely care about whether the country is welcoming or not, you look at the data in terms of attitudes of the British public, and it is complex. They do and always have valued high-skilled immigration, yada yada, but you also look at what it is to be welcoming from the other side. And it is not just the public attitudes, it is when someone comes into the country and whether they get abuse from that minority of the public or whether they get abuse from the government, and that is separate from public attitudes. If they are mistreated by the government in terms of hoops that they're made to jump through, in terms of government rhetoric that they hear, or in terms of things that they see in the press, that all factors in to whether the country as a whole is welcoming to immigrants. That's the key thing. But for me, where this goes from just being wrong into being deeply disingenuous and actually dangerous is the fact that if you're going to take on this topic, rather than using the clever sophistry of Michael Gove, you actually have to acknowledge the pain and the damage caused. I have dealt with people in tears because of this, and if you haven't seen that side, then you don't know, but that's what it is to be welcoming. And the problem with Michael Gove is, repeatedly, that he doesn't do that British thing of fair play and fair acknowledgement. Rather, he always likes to play with the sophistry. So, for example, with that 350 million figure, when it was pointed out that that was wrong because it was less because of the rebate, he goes, no, actually, it was more. It's more, okay? When it was pointed out to him that there's threats of dropping British standards in order to do trade deals with other countries, he says, no, we're not going to lower standards, we're going to increase them. He always goes the other way, you see? That's his little trick. And then, when clearly we have whole societies of immigrants here that feel less welcome in the country, he comes out and says, no, actually, thanks to Brexit, they are so much more welcome. In fact, they're so incredibly welcome. And the danger is here that it doesn't acknowledge real damage caused. It dismisses the pain, the real legitimate pain of the victims, rather than acknowledging them and dealing with it, and it legitimizes the attitude of the bullies. So now, thanks to Michael Gove, should any immigrants complain that they don't feel welcome anymore, one of his little acolytes or followers are going to say, actually, don't you know that data shows you're far more welcome now than you were before? And then they tootle off, absolutely dismissing it, failing to acknowledge all of the other arguments that I've put before you about how welcoming environment is more than a public attitude survey. It's about whether they're actually really getting abuse in real life, and also being mistreated by a government, and also seeing toxic discourse around who they are and what they're contributing. And it has another dangerous fallout as well, and that is people look at this, and before they go through it and can articulate all the things that I've spent time looking at and going through, they know it's wrong, they know it's fundamentally wrong, and they bark back and they react, but generally it serves to heighten distrust in politicians. You sense inherently when someone is being that worm in the apple, when someone is twisting things, being manipulative, being disingenuous. And the more we see politicians doing this in our country, the more that erodes the kind of quality country that I want Britain to be, and having the quality discourse that I would like our broader society to have, because straight up manipulative lines get into the press and then there's very little you can do about it, and it's deeply frustrating, and it starts taking our country down paths that that we really don't want to go. So that, for me, is why Michael Gove's statement on this is not just wrong in terms of fundamental path of logic, but it is also insulting to those immigrants, both EU and non-EU, that have genuinely suffered and genuinely felt a less welcoming environment, that it is also dangerous because it encourages other people also to dismiss their legitimate concerns, but it is also dangerous because then people in broader society start losing faith in politicians because they know inherently when they're being dealt with manipulative sophistry in order to serve political agendas, rather than to have good, open, healthy discussion that acknowledges pain and looks to find progressive solutions. So it is good that the public are now seeing aggressive immigration policy for what it is. Anti-British, anti what we stand for. It's good that our attitudes are actually becoming more welcoming to migrants, but it is wrong, it is very wrong to associate this with Brexit, as in a credit for Brexit, and to thereby dismiss everything that has flared up in the concerns of the immigrants in our country during this time. We need to be welcoming them more and acknowledging their concerns more, not toying around with language to serve our own agendas. Okay, thank you.